When I walked into the courtroom that morning, my daughter, Aaliyah, rolled her eyes and muttered something dismissive to her husband, Deshaun. The air crackled with unspoken tension, heavy like a storm about to break, every glance between us like sparks threatening to ignite. But then, something truly extraordinary unfolded. The judge, mid-sentence, abruptly stopped, his gaze locking onto mine. He visibly froze, a flicker of disbelief crossing his features before he uttered a single stunned word. "It's her." A hush fell over the courtroom, a profound silence that swallowed every other sound. In that instant, the collective understanding dawned upon everyone present. They had no idea who I truly was, the depth of my life story, until this very moment. That trial altered the course of everything. My name is Loretta. I'm 69 years old, and until a few short months prior, I was just your average grandmother. Each morning I'd wake at 6, the ritual beginning with the brewing of my coffee in the same chipped mug I'd cherished for 2 decades. As the rich aroma filled my small kitchen, I'd gaze out the window, tending to the African violets my late husband had so dearly loved. It was a simple, predictable existence, punctuated by small, comforting routines that brought me a sense of peace, a haven in the storms that were yet to come. For 45 years my life revolved around Aaliyah, my only daughter. I sacrificed everything: nights spent cleaning offices, weekends spent baking and selling homemade cupcakes, countless hours spent sewing to eke out extra income, all to ensure she had the opportunities one never did, a college education, a life brimming with possibilities that extended beyond the limitations I'd known. When she married Deshaun, a man whose arrogance was a constant affront to my sensibilities, a man who never offered me a kind word, I swallowed my pride. Every Sunday I welcomed them into my home with a meticulously set table and my warmest smile, clinging to the hope of a deeper connection. How naive I was. Instead of the closeness I yearned for after my husband's passing, Aaliyah began to perceive me as a burden, an impediment to her own aspirations. Our visits became infrequent and strained, characterized by coldness and a palpable distance. Her calls grew less frequent, replaced by increasingly elaborate excuses for avoiding me. The most humiliating moment of my life arrived on a bleak October Thursday. I prepared her favorite meal, chicken and dumplings, a dish that took hours to perfect, a labor of love that had always brought a smile to her face when she was a child. I laid out my finest tablecloth, the one adorned with embroidery I'd painstakingly completed during her teenage years, and even purchased fresh flowers for the centerpiece. When they arrived, Deshaun entered my home as though he owned it, sinking into my late husband's armchair and immediately switching on the television without so much as a greeting. Aaliyah, wearing a green dress I'd purchased for her, wore an expression as frigid as an Arctic winter. "Mom, we need to talk," she announced, her voice a chilling imitation of a stranger's, a stark contrast to the gentle tones of her youth. She perched on the edge of the chair, her posture radiating impatience, eagerness to escape. "Deshaun and I have made a decision," she continued, while he remained glued to the television screen. "This house is too big for you. You can't maintain it alone anymore. And we need a larger space when we start a family. We've found the perfect retirement community for people your age." The words felt like a physical blow, the floor seeming to disappear from beneath my feet. This was the house where Aaliyah had taken her first steps, where we'd celebrated every birthday, where her father had breathed his last, holding my hand. Every corner held a precious memory, every photograph on the wall whispered tales of our shared history. "But Aaliyah, this is our home. All our memories are here," I pleaded, my voice cracking, each word a painful gasp. "Memories are in the heart, Mom, not on the walls," she retorted, her icy tone searing me to the core. "Besides, the community has activities for people like you. You'll be better off there. You'll have company your own age." Deshaun offered a smug smile, his eyes measuring the room as if he'd already claimed ownership. "It's for the best, Mrs. Loretta," he added, his false pleasantries grating on my nerves. "We'll handle all the paperwork. Don't you worry about a thing." My heart shattered into countless fragments, the betrayal cutting deeper than any knife, leaving me breathless in my own home. My own daughter, the child for whom I'd sacrificed my youth, my health, my dreams, was ejecting me from my home to bestow it upon that despicable man. Tears welled in my eyes, but I forced them back, refusing to grant them the satisfaction of witnessing my pain. I need time to think, I whispered, clinging to the vestiges of my dignity. There's not much to think about, Mom, Aaliyah replied, rising to her feet. It's already decided. They're coming to appraise the house next week. And with that they left, leaving behind untouched chicken and dumplings, wilting flowers and my broken heart, strewn across the table where we'd once shared joy and laughter. That night sleep eluded me. Shadows seemed alive, whispering doubts, clawing at my sanity as the walls of my home closed in. I sat in the kitchen, gazing at the photographs on the wall. Aaliyah as a baby, Aaliyah on her first day of school, Aaliyah on her graduation day. In each picture I was there, holding her, embracing her, beaming with pride. How had it come to this? How had the girl who once proclaimed me her hero now treated me with such contempt? The following days were a living nightmare. Deshawn arrived unannounced with a real estate appraiser, a man in a gray suit who surveyed my house as if it were mere merchandise. He scribbled notes, meticulously measured rooms, and discussed potential renovations as though I were invisible, a non-entity. Aaliyah stood beside him, nodding in agreement to each disparaging remark about my home. The pipes are old, the appraiser stated, and these kitchen tiles are outdated. You'd need to replace everything. Those tiles, each one representing hours of my husband's loving labor, a testament to our hopes and dreams when Aaliyah was 10 years old, were now deemed mere obstacles to their ambitions. The humiliation intensified when Aaliyah presented brochures for the retirement community. Look, Mom, it has lovely gardens and they have bingo on Tuesdays, she said in that synthetic tone she reserved for attempts at persuasion. Plus, there's a nurse on duty 24/7. You'll be safer. I had resided in that house for 30 years without incident. I knew my neighbors, had established routines, cherished my plants, and held dear my memories. Yet to Aaliyah none of that mattered. All that mattered was my removal from her path. Then, unexpectedly, they arrived with legal documents. Deshawn swaggered in as though he were the rightful owner, followed by Aaliyah and a man who identified himself as a lawyer. Mrs. Loretta, we have all the necessary documents prepared for the property transfer. We simply need your signature. Transfer? I asked, bewildered. I thought you were going to sell the house. Aaliyah averted her gaze. Well, Deshawn and I decided to keep it. It's better for the family to retain the property. That's when the full extent of their treachery became clear. They didn't simply want me out. They wanted to seize my home, the legacy my husband and I had painstakingly built. It was a blatant theft masquerading as filial duty. I'm not signing anything, I declared, summoning every ounce of strength I possessed. Deshawn abruptly stood. His true nature, the aggression he'd always suppressed in my husband's presence, now laid bare. Ma'am, you're no longer capable of making sound decisions. Aaliyah is your sole heir, and she's acting in your best interest. This is my house, I shouted, astonished by my own resolve. And I'm not leaving. Mom, don't make this harder, Aaliyah murmured, displaying a hint of unease. You know you can't continue living alone. Last week you forgot to turn off the gas stove. It was a lie, a blatant fabrication. I'd never forgotten to turn off the gas. But Deshawn seized upon it, relishing the convenient excuse. Come on, Aaliyah. Your mother isn't well. It's dangerous to leave her alone. The lawyer cleared his throat. Ma'am, if you refuse to sign voluntarily, we may have to explore other legal avenues. A mental incapacity proceeding, for instance. The world seemed to close in around me. My own daughter was prepared to have me declared incompetent to steal my home. The man I'd accepted as a son-in-law was threatening me in my own living room, and I, a 69-year-old woman, found myself utterly alone against them. I need time, I mumbled, defeated. You have 1 week, Deshawn said coldly. Then we'll do what we have to do. When they departed, I collapsed into my husband's armchair and wept. The first genuine tears since his funeral. I wept for the daughter I'd lost, for the home they were stealing, for the life crumbling around me. I felt betrayed, humiliated, utterly defenseless. That night, for the first time, I considered surrender. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps I was too old, too frail, too insignificant to fight. Perhaps it was best to accept my fate and fade away quietly, as they desired. But then, a spark of defiance ignited within me, a tiny ember of dignity refusing to be extinguished. I wouldn't allow them to walk all over me without a fight. Not after a lifetime of sacrifice and devotion. The next day, Aaliyah returned alone. For a fleeting moment, hope surged within me. Perhaps she'd reconsidered. Perhaps she'd come to seek my forgiveness. How wrong I was. "Mom, I'm here to help you pack," she announced in that emotionless voice she'd adopted. "I brought boxes. We can start with your clothes." I stared at her, searching for any trace of the daughter I'd raised, but found only a stranger, cold and calculating. "Aaliyah, please reconsider. I'm your mother." "That's precisely why I'm doing this," she replied, avoiding my gaze. "Because I love you and I want what's best for you." Love. This was love? Robbing me of my home, my dignity, everything I possessed? This was love? Over the next few hours, Aaliyah methodically packed my belongings as if they were worthless junk. She tossed family photographs carelessly into boxes, unceremoniously packing the books my husband had gifted me, the dishes from our wedding china, the tablecloths I'd embroidered during countless sleepless nights. "This dress is so old, Mom. I don't think you need it," she said, holding up my mourning dress, the one I'd worn to my husband's funeral. "Leave it," I pleaded. "Please just leave it." But she'd already placed it in a donation bag. My pain, my feelings, my very existence held no significance. The final indignity came when she discovered my jewelry box, containing my wedding ring, the earrings my husband had given me for our 20th anniversary, and a delicate gold chain that had belonged to my mother. "This jewelry will be safer in a safe deposit box," Aaliyah said, pocketing it. "It could get lost or stolen at the community." "Those are mine," I yelled, attempting to retrieve my purse. "Mom, you're becoming quite agitated. This only confirms you can't care for yourself," she replied with a sickening calm that sent a shiver down my spine. In that instant, I knew I'd lost my daughter forever. The Aaliyah I knew was gone, replaced by a heartless woman, manipulated by Deshaun and blinded by avarice. That night, when Aaliyah departed, carrying my jewelry and my most precious memories, I was left alone in my nearly empty house. The bare walls served as a stark reminder of how little I had left, how easily they dismantled a lifetime. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by open boxes and scattered memories, questioning how I'd become invisible, how I'd ceased to matter. The days that followed were an agonizing torment. Deshaun appeared early each morning to oversee the packing process, treating me as though I were incapable of managing my own affairs. He brought in strangers who measured, photographed, and appraised every corner of my house, discussing me as if I were absent, an old piece of furniture awaiting disposal. "The lady will need to expedite the process," Deshaun instructed Aaliyah. "The movers are arriving on Monday." It was Friday. I had 3 days remaining in the home where I'd lived for 30 years, where I'd raised my daughter, where I'd loved and been loved. "What if I don't finish packing?" I whispered. "Don't worry, Mom," Aaliyah replied without looking up from her phone. "The movers will handle everything. Just take what's essential." Essential? As if an entire lifetime could be reduced to a few essentials. That afternoon, after they left, I wandered through my house like a ghost. I touched the walls my husband had painted, sat in every chair where we'd shared family breakfasts, opened every drawer holding little treasures from my past. In my husband's desk drawer, I found old letters, paid bills, and some documents I'd never examined. Most were insignificant, but one folder caught my eye. Marked with my husband's initials, it bore a small lock. Driven by curiosity and a desperate need for connection to happier times, I searched for the key in his usual hiding spots, finally locating it inside an old book, marking a page detailing investments and properties. When I opened the folder, my world irrevocably shifted. The documents within were initially perplexing, but one instantly captivated my attention. A will dated 6 months before my husband's death. A document I'd never seen. My hands trembled as I read. My husband, always so discreet about finances, had been far more industrious than I'd ever imagined. The document revealed that my dear husband hadn't been the humble employee I'd believed him to be. For decades he'd quietly invested every spare penny he earned, acquiring small properties during market downturns, investing in company stocks that had skyrocketed in value, accumulating a fortune beyond my wildest dreams. But that wasn't all. The will clearly stated that I was the sole inheritor of everything. Aaliyah would only receive a small sum upon my death, and only if she treated me with love and respect during my final years. My husband had been far wiser than I knew. He'd sensed something in Deshawn that I'd refused to acknowledge. A clause within the will left me breathless. My husband owned the entire building where Aaliyah and Deshawn resided. The apartment they believed they were renting was actually ours. Every tenant in the building was paying rent to us, rent that had been automatically deposited into an account I knew nothing about. With trembling fingers, I sifted through the papers until I found the bank statements. The amount was astronomical. For 2 years since my husband's death, I'd been living as a poor widow while a fortune had quietly amassed in the bank. There were more surprises. My husband owned shares in Deshawn's company. Not minor shares, but a significant enough stake to practically influence its decisions. He'd also invested in restaurants, small businesses, and even a substantial plot of land on the city's outskirts, now worth millions. I reread every document, every contract, every certificate. Everything was impeccably organized and legally sound. My husband had silently constructed an empire, and I, without knowing it, was its empress. But the most profound impact came from a personal letter at the end of the folder, penned in my husband's hand and addressed to me. My dearest Loretta, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you, and you've discovered this treasure I've kept for you. Forgive me for not revealing it during my lifetime, but I wanted it to be a surprise for your golden years. You always worked so hard, sacrificed so much for Aaliyah and me, and I wanted to ensure you'd never want for anything. I must also confess something. I never fully trusted Deshawn. There's something about him I don't like. An ambition that concerns me. That's why I structured everything this way. If Aaliyah cares for you and respects you as you deserve, she will have a comfortable life. But if she ever mistreats you or attempts to take advantage of you, you have the power to protect yourself. Use this power wisely, my love. Not to inflict harm but to protect yourself and to teach. Deep down, Aaliyah is a good person. She's simply misguided. But if you need to defend yourself, you now possess the means to do so. Signed, your husband who loves you for all eternity. I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by documents representing millions, weeping for the wise man I'd lost, and the daughter I was about to lose. But for the first time in months, these weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of gratitude, of hope, and yes, of quiet satisfaction. Aaliyah and Deshawn believed they were stripping me of everything. They had no idea I owned the building where they lived, the shares in Deshawn's company, properties scattered throughout the city. They thought they were ousting me from my house to claim it for themselves, unaware that this house was the least valuable asset I possessed. That night I didn't sleep, but for the first time in weeks it wasn't due to sadness. My mind was racing, planning, calculating. My husband had given me more than money. He'd given me power, and I had to decide how to wield it. Monday morning dawned with a gentle rain drumming against the windows. Aaliyah and Deshawn arrived early with the movers, anticipating finding me packed and ready to depart. Instead, they found me calmly seated in my favorite armchair, sipping tea as if it were any other day. "Mom, what are you doing?" "The movers are here," Aaliyah said, her impatience palpable. "I'm not leaving," I replied, my calmness surprising even myself. Deshawn approached, his threatening smile familiar. "Mrs. Loretta, we've already discussed this. You have no choice." I looked him directly in the eyes for the first time in years. "You're right, Deshawn. I don't have a choice. But it turns out you don't either." Something in my tone must have alerted them, because Aaliyah moved closer, her expression filled with worry. What are you talking about, Mom? I'm talking about the fact that I've just discovered something quite interesting about my financial situation, I said, taking another sip of tea. But don't worry, you'll understand everything soon. Deshawn and Aaliyah exchanged glances, the look they reserved for instances when they believed I was rambling incoherently. But I was no longer the frightened woman of the previous week. I had a plan and, more importantly, the power to execute it. Mom, enough with the games, Aaliyah said, her irritation evident. The movers are waiting, and they have other jobs scheduled. Then they can leave, I replied calmly, because they're not moving a single thing from here. Deshawn stood abruptly. Ma'am, I don't think you comprehend the situation. You no longer have any say in this matter. On the contrary, Deshawn, I think it's you who doesn't understand the situation, I countered. I slowly rose from my chair and walked to the desk where I'd left some of the documents. Not all of them, just a select few necessary for this conversation. Did you know that your apartment, the one you've been occupying for 3 years, has never been paid to the rightful owner? Aaliyah frowned. What are you talking about? We pay it religiously every month. Yes, but you pay it to a property management company that deposits the money to me because I own the entire building. The ensuing silence was deafening. Deshawn was the first to react, offering a nervous laugh. That's impossible. You live on a meager pension. I lived on a pension because I chose to, I replied, savoring their confusion. My husband was far more astute than any of us realized. I presented them with one of the property deeds. Aaliyah took it, her hands trembling, and read it repeatedly. This can't be real, she murmured. It's as real as the fact that you were attempting to evict me from my own home to seize it for yourselves. But it turns out this house is the least valuable thing I own. Deshawn snatched the document from Aaliyah's grasp, his face paling as he read. This has to be a forgery, a fabricated document. You can verify it at your leisure, I said with a smile I hadn't felt in months. In fact, I encourage you to do so. Aaliyah collapsed onto the sofa, as if her legs had given way. Why didn't you ever tell us anything? Because I didn't know myself until 3 days ago. Your father kept this secret to protect me. What a visionary he was. Deshawn began pacing, clearly agitated. This changes everything, Aaliyah. If your mother truly owns the building, it means she can evict you at any time. Along with all the other tenants who have been paying me on time for 2 years. I finished for him. You can't do that, Aaliyah said, her voice cracking. We're family. Family. The word escaped my lips with more bitterness than I intended. Like when you were about to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal my house. Like when you packed my memories as if they were trash. Like when you took my mother's jewelry. Aaliyah began to cry, but these weren't the manipulative tears she'd learned to employ. They were tears of genuine fear. Mom, please. We can fix this. It was all Deshawn's idea. Aaliyah! Deshawn shouted, furious at her for implicating him. It's true, she continued, ignoring him. He convinced me it was best for you. He said you were losing your memory, that you couldn't take care of yourself. And you believed him? I asked, feeling my heart break anew. Do you know your own mother so little that you believed him over your own intuition? The movers, who'd been waiting at the entrance, approached, their confusion evident. Excuse me, are you taking the items or not? Because we have another job scheduled. No, I replied firmly. Nothing is being moved. You can leave. Deshawn moved closer, his usual hidden aggression surfacing. This isn't over, old lady. We're going to challenge those documents. We're going to prove they're fake. Go right ahead, I said, unfazed by his threat. In the meantime, I hope you've saved enough money to find a new place to live because on the 1st of next month, you'll receive an eviction notice. You can't do this to us. Deshawn yelled, losing his composure completely. And I will. But don't worry, I'll be fair. I'll give you the full 30 days the law requires. Aaliyah stood abruptly. Mom, please, you have to understand. Deshawn told me that if I didn't convince you to move, He would leave me. He said he couldn't stand living knowing you were here alone, endangering yourself. And that justifies everything you did to me? I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. It justifies treating me like trash, carelessly packing my memories and stealing my grandmother's jewelry? I'll give it back to you right now, Aaliyah said, frantically searching her purse. It's too late for that, Aaliyah. Deshaun approached again, but his demeanor had shifted. He was no longer threatening but almost pleading. Mrs. Loretta, we can reach an agreement. Aaliyah is pregnant. Are you really going to throw your grandchild out on the street? I felt a sharp blow to my gut. Aaliyah was pregnant and she hadn't told me. I was going to be a grandmother, and I learned about it as a piece of blackmail. Is it true? I asked Aaliyah. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I wanted to tell you differently. I wanted it to be a special surprise. Like the surprise of throwing me out of my own house? I replied, though my resolve was starting to weaken. But then I remembered my husband's words from his letter. Not to hurt, but to protect yourself and to teach. Aaliyah needed to learn. And her child deserved to grow up with values different from those Deshaun was instilling. The news of the pregnancy momentarily disarmed me. But then the pain they had inflicted surged back. A baby didn't erase the humiliation, the contempt, the months of suffering they had put me through. Congratulations on the baby, Aaliyah, I said, forcing a calmness I barely felt. But that doesn't change what you did to me. Mom, please, Aaliyah pleaded, her voice choked with emotion. Think about your grandchild. Do you really want them to grow up without knowing their grandmother? Their grandmother was here all along, I replied, my voice steady. You were the ones who decided to get rid of me. Deshaun tried one last manipulative tactic. Mrs. Loretta, if you really have as much money as you say, why don't you help us instead of punishing us? We could be a united family. I looked at him with the utter contempt he deserved. A united family, like when you threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent. Like when you turned my daughter against me. Quiet, Deshaun. I interrupted him, surprised by the authority in my voice. I've heard enough of your lies. The movers had left, leaving us in the heavy tension that permeated the house. Aaliyah wept silently. Deshaun paced like a caged animal, and for the first time in months, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Here's what's going to happen, I announced. You have 30 days to find another place to live. During that time, I don't want to see you around here unless it's a genuine emergency. And after that? Aaliyah asked, her voice barely a whisper. After that, we'll see if you've learned anything about respect and family. Deshaun exploded. This is emotional blackmail. You're using your money to manipulate us. Manipulation? The word elicited a bitter laugh from me. Like when you used my supposed mental incompetence to manipulate me. Like when you used my mother's love to blackmail me. It's different, Deshaun mumbled, his voice lacking conviction. You're right, I admitted. It is different because I actually possess the power I'm using. Aaliyah slowly rose from the sofa. Is there anything we can do to change your mind? Yes, I replied without hesitation. But I don't think Deshaun is willing to do it. What is it? She asked, clinging to that last shred of hope. I want an apology, a genuine, heartfelt apology for every humiliation you inflicted upon me. I want you to admit that you treated me like trash. And I want Deshaun to admit this was all his idea. Deshaun's face flushed crimson with anger. I'm never going to humiliate myself in front of you. Then get ready to move, I said simply. Aaliyah looked at him pleadingly. Deshaun, please. She's my mother. She's your mother-in-law. We can swallow our pride for our child. No, he yelled. I'm not going to bow down to this manipulative old woman. The insult hung heavy in the air. A stinging slap across the face. Aaliyah's mouth gaped open, finally seeing her husband without the rose-tinted glasses of blind love. Manipulative old woman, I repeated softly. Interesting. That's what you truly think of me, Deshaun. No, Aaliyah murmured, but he'd already lost control. Yes, that's what I think. A bitter old lady who can't stand to see her daughter happy. That's why she made up this whole story about the money. Made up? I walked to my desk and retrieved more documents. Did I also make up these bank statements? Did I make up these property deeds? Did I make up these stock certificates? I placed each document on the dining room table, one by one, until the surface was buried under irrefutable proof of my wealth. Aaliyah moved closer and began examining the papers with trembling hands. Oh my God, Mom. This is real. It's all real. Very real, I confirmed. And now you understand why your husband is so desperate to discredit me. Deshawn tried a final desperate gambit. Aaliyah, you can't believe your mother hid all this for years. She's a liar. No, Aaliyah suddenly yelled, surprising us all. Stop it, Deshawn. Just stop. She turned to me, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mom, forgive me. Forgive me for everything. You're right. I treated you like trash. I took your memories, your jewelry, your dignity. And the worst part is that I did it because he convinced me you were a burden. Aaliyah, don't listen to her, Deshawn tried, but she ignored him completely. He filled my head with lies about your mental health, about the dangers of you living alone. He made me feel guilty for leaving you here when all you wanted was to be in your home. Aaliyah, be quiet, Deshawn ordered her, but it was too late. Don't you ever tell me to be quiet again, she yelled at him. I'm sick of your manipulations. Sick of you using me to hurt my mother. The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time in years, Aaliyah had defended what she believed was right instead of blindly obeying her husband's orders. Deshawn looked at her with a chilling coldness. If you choose your mother over me, Aaliyah, this relationship is over. Aaliyah stood motionless for a moment, processing the ultimatum. Then, to my surprise, she straightened up and met his gaze directly. Then it's over, she said, her voice firm and unfamiliar. Deshawn was paralyzed, as if unable to believe what he had just heard. For years he had controlled her every decision, every thought, every move. And now for the first time she had said no. You're not serious, he murmured, a nervous smile twitching his lips. You're pregnant, Aaliyah. You can't raise a child alone. I won't be alone, Aaliyah replied, looking at me for the first time in months with something that resembled love. I have my mother. But I wasn't ready to forgive so easily. The months of humiliation, the sleepless nights, the feeling of losing my only daughter. All of that didn't simply vanish with a few words. Aaliyah, I said softly, I appreciate that you've finally opened your eyes, but this doesn't undo everything that happened. Her face fell. Mom, please. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Deshawn, seeing his control slipping, shifted tactics. He knelt before me, feigning repentance. Mrs. Loretta, you're right. It was all my fault. I convinced Aaliyah that you couldn't take care of yourself. I pressured her into making difficult decisions. Please forgive me. I looked down at him, a mixture of satisfaction and disgust welling up inside me. It was pathetic to see him grovel after months of arrogance. You're asking for forgiveness now, Deshawn, when you discover that I'm not the poor, helpless old woman you thought I was. I was terribly wrong, he continued his performance. Let me make it up to you. We can be a happy family. A happy family? I repeated. Like when you threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent. That was a mistake. Like when you called me a manipulative old woman 5 minutes ago. Deshawn swallowed hard, realizing every word he'd spoken was being used against him. I was upset. I didn't know what I was saying. No, I said firmly. You knew exactly what you were saying. You were finally showing your true face. I turned to Aaliyah, who watched the scene with shame and pain etched on her features. And you, Aaliyah, for months you treated me like a nuisance. Do you think an apology erases all that? No, she admitted, her voice cracking. I know I can't erase what I did, but I can try to make things right. How? Aaliyah looked at Deshawn, still kneeling with a pleading expression. Then she looked at me. By leaving him, she said finally. By leaving this man who convinced me to betray the only person who has ever loved me unconditionally. Deshawn stood abruptly. You can't be serious. You're having my child. I am having my child, Aaliyah replied, her determination filling me with pride despite everything. And I don't want my child growing up watching his father manipulate and mistreat his grandmother. Aaliyah, you're making the biggest mistake of your life, Deshawn threatened. The biggest mistake of my life was marrying you, she retorted. Deshawn looked at both of us with pure hatred. This isn't over. I'm going to fight for custody of my child. I'm going to prove that both of you are crazy. What money are you going to fight with? I asked calmly. Because tomorrow morning I'm going to talk to your boss. Did you know I own enough shares in your company to influence personnel decisions? Deshawn's face went completely white. You wouldn't dare. After all you've done to me. Of course I would. That's an abuse of power, he muttered. Like when you abused my mother's love to manipulate me. Like when you abused Aaliyah's trust to turn her against me. Deshawn headed for the door but paused before leaving. This doesn't end here, he said. His voice laced with venom. I'm going to destroy both of you. Go ahead and try, I replied unfazed. But do it from somewhere else because you have exactly 1 hour to get your things out of my building. 1 hour. You said we had 30 days. That was when Aaliyah was with you. Now that she's on her own, there's no reason for you to continue living on my property. Deshawn slammed the door, the entire house trembling from the force. Aaliyah and I were alone for the first time in months, enveloped in heavy silence and documents that confirmed a reality still difficult to process. Mom, Aaliyah murmured after a long pause. Can you ever forgive me? I looked at her, this 30-year-old woman who had just discovered she'd been living a lie, who had betrayed her mother for a worthless man, who was pregnant and alone. I don't know, Aaliyah, I replied honestly. You hurt me a lot. I know, she whispered. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you. Starting with what? Starting with giving you back your mother's jewelry, she said, producing the small bag she'd taken days before. And by asking if I can stay here tonight. I have nowhere else to go. I looked at the bag containing my mother's jewelry. Then I looked at my pregnant, alone daughter, and my heart softened just a little. One night I said finally, but tomorrow we start talking about how you're going to earn my trust back. Aaliyah nodded, tears of gratitude streaming down her cheeks. Thank you, Mom. I promise I'm going to make things right. But I knew promises were easily made and hard to keep. The real test would come in the days ahead. The next few days were strange and tense. Aaliyah stayed in her old room, which I'd kept exactly as it was since her wedding. During the day we moved through the house like polite strangers, only speaking about necessities. Breakfast, the weather, her morning sickness. But I watched, observing every gesture, every word, every attempt Aaliyah made to regain my trust. And what I saw gave me hope. For the first time in years, my daughter was acting independently, not relying on others to solve her problems. She washed her dishes immediately after eating, kept her room spotless, and even began helping with chores around the house without being asked. On the third day, as I watered my violets by the window, Aaliyah approached with a cup of tea. Mom, can we talk? I nodded without turning. I was learning that silence held more power than 1,000 words. I've been thinking a lot these past few days, she began, sitting in the chair where Deshawn used to sit like a king. About everything that happened, about the things I did and said. I continued watering my plants, waiting. I've realized that it wasn't just Deshawn who changed me. I allowed him to change me. I chose to believe him instead of trusting my own heart. I finally turned to look at her. She had deep circles under her eyes and looked thinner despite the pregnancy. She clearly hadn't been sleeping well. And why do you think that happened? I asked her. Aaliyah sighed deeply. Because it was easier to blame you than to face the fact that I had married the wrong man. That honesty took me by surprise. I had expected excuses, justifications, but not that raw admission. When Deshawn started complaining that you visited too much, I knew deep down that he was being unfair. But it was easier to think that you were clingy than to accept that he was selfish. She put her hands on her belly where the pregnancy was barely showing. When he started suggesting you move to a retirement community, I knew it was wrong, but he convinced me it was for your own good. And I wanted to believe him because it meant I didn't have to face the real problem. What was the real problem? I asked, though I already knew the answer. That she had married a man who disrespected her family, disrespected her, and was never going to change. In the days that followed, Aaliyah began to reveal things that chilled me to the bone. How Deshawn had gradually isolated her from her friends, convincing her they were a bad influence. How he controlled every cent she spent, telling her that women didn't know how to manage money, how he had convinced her to quit her job because real wives dedicated themselves to the home. "And you never thought to talk to me about this?" I asked her one afternoon. "Deshaun told me you wouldn't understand, that you were from another generation. He convinced me that if I told you our problems, you would tell me to leave him, and he didn't want any outside interference in our marriage." Each revelation hurt more than the last. My daughter had suffered in silence while I believed she was happy, and when she'd finally tried to reach out to me, it was already too late because Deshaun had programmed her to see me as the enemy. 2 weeks after Deshaun left, Aaliyah received a call that left her pale as a ghost. "It's the building manager," she said, her voice trembling. "Deshaun is in the lobby. He says he has the right to come up because he's still my husband." "And what did you tell him?" "That I didn't want to see him, but he won't leave. He's yelling that he's going to call the police, that this is kidnapping." I rose from my chair with a calmness that surprised me. "Tell the manager to come down. I'm going to talk to him." "Mom, he's really upset. We don't know what he's capable of." "Exactly," I replied. "That's why I have to go down there." When I reached the lobby, I found Deshaun in a furious rage, yelling at the poor building manager, who was trembling behind his desk. "That crazy old lady has my wife kidnapped," Deshaun was shouting. "I want you to call the police right now." "Good afternoon, Deshaun," I said in a calm, steady voice. He turned, his eyes bloodshot. He'd obviously been drinking. "You give me back my wife right now." "Aaliyah is exactly where she wants to be," I replied. "And if you don't leave my property immediately, I'll be the one calling the police." "This isn't your property. You're a liar." I took out my phone and dialed my lawyer's number, putting it on speakerphone. "Attorney Miss Carter," I said when she answered, "it's Loretta. I have an agitated man here who refuses to leave my building. Could you confirm that I am the legal owner?" "Of course, Mrs. Loretta," my lawyer's clear voice replied. "You are the sole owner of the building located at." Deshaun went silent as he listened to the legal confirmation. The manager looked at him with a mixture of fear and embarrassment, finally understanding the situation. "Anything else you need me to clarify, Deshaun?" I asked after hanging up. "This isn't over," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're right," I agreed. "Because tomorrow I'll talk to your supervisor at the company and the day after that to the bank that gave you the loan for your car. Contacts are useful when you have enough money." Deshaun left without another word. But I knew he would be back. Men like him don't give up easily. 2 months later, the day of the trial arrived like a storm we'd been bracing for. Deshaun had made good on his threat and sued us for parental alienation and financial manipulation, demanding full custody of Aaliyah's unborn child. That morning, as I dressed in my best black suit, Aaliyah entered my room, tears in her eyes. "Mom, I'm scared," she confessed. "What if the judge believes him? What if he takes my baby away?" I hugged her for the first time in months, feeling her body tremble against mine. "That's not going to happen," I assured her. "We have the truth on our side." When we arrived at the courthouse, Deshaun was already there with a lawyer who had clearly cost him more than he could afford. He looked at me with that familiar hatred. But this time it didn't intimidate me. I had something he would never have. The peace of mind that comes from knowing you're on the right side. Aaliyah and I sat on our bench. She wore a purple dress that highlighted her 5-month pregnancy, and I wore the earrings my husband had given me for our anniversary. We were prepared. Deshaun's lawyer began his argument, portraying me as a vengeful woman who had used her money to destroy a happy marriage. He spoke of manipulation, emotional blackmail, and a toxic mother-in-law who couldn't accept that her daughter had grown up. When it was our turn, my lawyer, Miss Carter, stood up elegantly and began presenting the evidence. Text messages where Deshaun insulted Aaliyah, recordings where he threatened to leave her if she didn't evict me, testimonies from neighbors who had heard his yelling and abuse. But the decisive moment came when the judge looked up and stared at me. "Mrs. Loretta Williams?" he asked, disbelief coloring his tone. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, confused by his reaction. The judge removed his glasses and studied me carefully. "Did you work at the family court 30 years ago?" My heart stopped. "Yes, Your Honor." I was a secretary for Judge Miller. You helped me when I was an intern. You taught me how to organize files. You brought me coffee when I worked late. You were always kind to me when everyone else treated me like I was invisible. The entire courtroom fell silent. Aaliyah looked at me in amazement. Deshawn turned pale, and I felt as if the world had stopped. Your Honor, I am Judge Jamal Brooks, the judge continued. Do you remember me? And then I saw it. Beneath the gray hair, the wrinkles, and the authority was the shy young man who had worked in my office decades ago. The boy I had defended when other lawyers mocked him. The one I had encouraged when he doubted his abilities. David, I murmured, feeling my eyes fill with tears. Of course I remember you. The judge smiled, and for a moment he was that insecure young man again, seeking approval. I never forgot your kindness, Mrs. Loretta. You told me that one day I would be a great judge when even I didn't believe it. Deshawn and his lawyer exchanged panicked glances. They knew they'd lost before they even began. Your Honor, Deshawn's lawyer interjected. I believe this constitutes a conflict of interest. There is no conflict, Judge Morales replied firmly. There is only justice, and after reviewing all the evidence presented, it is clear that Mr. Deshawn Foster has been the only manipulator in this story. The verdict was resounding. Deshawn lost all his parental rights and was prohibited from contacting Aaliyah or me. He also had to pay legal costs and a settlement for emotional damages. When we left the courthouse, Aaliyah hugged me as she hadn't since childhood. Mom, how is it possible that the judge knew you? Life goes in circles, honey, I replied. And kindness always comes back to you when you least expect it. 6 months later, when my granddaughter Imani was born, I understood that everything had been worth it. Aaliyah had rediscovered her true self. She had become the loving mother I always knew she could be. One afternoon, as we rocked the baby in our garden, Aaliyah asked the question I'd been waiting for. Mom, have you really forgiven me? I looked at her, at this woman. I forgave Aaliyah, acknowledging her growth and newfound self-respect. More importantly, I recognized her progress in forgiving herself. That evening, while steeping tea in my favorite chipped mug, I reflected on my late husband's letter and how I'd used his bequeathed power exactly as he'd intended, not for vengeance, but for protection and education. Aaliyah's journey underscored the truth that genuine love isn't about control, but about mutual respect. My own journey reinforced the timeless wisdom that asserting one's dignity is never a wasted effort, regardless of the timing. Gazing at my granddaughter playing in the garden, a smile touched my lips. Some battles are undeniably worth fighting, and certain victories possess a uniquely satisfying sweetness when they are hard-won. Ultimately, I hadn't needed to raise my voice to be heard. I merely needed to remember my true self and defend it with the quiet confidence of someone secure in their moral compass. 5 years post-trial, my life had undergone a transformation beyond my wildest imaginings. Little Imani, now a vibrant 4-year-old, mirroring her mother's spirited eyes and my own resolute nature, danced through the garden chasing butterflies, while Aaliyah and I prepared our Sunday lunch. Grandma Loretta, look what I found, Imani exclaimed, approaching me, a bright yellow flower clutched in her small hands. It's beautiful, my love, I responded, lifting her for a kiss. Shall we add it to the vase with the others? Aaliyah smiled from the kitchen. Over these years she had blossomed remarkably. She'd resumed her education, securing a position as an accountant at a thriving small firm. Most importantly, she'd rediscovered the spontaneous laughter that had characterized her childhood. Mom, a letter arrived for you, she announced, handing me an elegant envelope. It was from the foundation I had established 2 years prior, using a portion of my husband's inheritance. Home and Dignity had become a haven for elderly women suffering from familial abuse or neglect. What began as a tribute to my own experiences had evolved into something far greater. What does it say? Aaliyah inquired, her hands resting on her apron. They're inviting us to the inauguration of the third house, I replied, feeling the profound satisfaction that stems from knowing your suffering has served a greater purpose. 15 more women will find refuge there. In these past few years, we've assisted over 50 women in rebuilding their lives. Some, like myself, arrived stripped of their dignity by ungrateful children or abusive relatives. Others came alone, familyless, yet sharing similar stories of abandonment and mistreatment. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Aaliyah answered, returning with a knowing smile. "Mom, you have a visitor." Retired Judge Jamal Brooks entered, accompanied by a graceful silver-haired woman. "Mrs. Loretta." Judge Morales greeted me with his characteristic warm smile. "I'd like to introduce my wife, Elena." "It's an honor to meet you," Elena said, taking my hands. "David has told me so much about you. He says you were one of the most important people in his professional development." "He exaggerates," I replied, though deeply touched by their visit. "Not at all," David insisted. "And that's why we wanted to invite you personally. The Retired Judges Association is going to present you with an award for your work with the foundation." "That's not necessary," I began to protest. "Yes, it is," he interrupted. "Your story inspired many of us to reflect on true justice, the kind that transcends written law." After their departure, Aaliyah and I sat on the porch as Imani played with her dolls. The garden was more vibrant than ever. I'd hired a gardener, but I still personally tended the African violets my husband had cherished. "Do you know what I admire most about you, Mom?" Aaliyah asked unexpectedly. "What?" "That you never succumbed to bitterness after everything I put you through. After all the pain, you never let it harden your heart." "Of course I was bitter," I admitted. "There were nights when resentment consumed me. But your father taught me something invaluable in his letter." "What did he teach you?" "That true power doesn't stem from revenge, but from the ability to transform pain into something beneficial for others." Aaliyah nodded, recognizing the transformative process she'd undergone herself. She now volunteered at the foundation, using her experiences to mentor young women trapped in toxic relationships. "Did you ever find out what happened to Deshawn?" she asked, referring to my former lawyer. "My lawyer, Miss Carter, told me he moved to another city. It seems he remarried," I replied, carefully choosing my words. "I hope he learned something from this, but honestly, it's no longer my concern." "You're not even curious?" "No," I replied honestly. "I learned that some people enter our lives solely to teach us lessons. Once the lesson is learned, we can let them go." Imani came running, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Grandma, will you tell me the story of the brave grandma?" It was her favorite story, a child-friendly adaptation of my experiences. In my version, the grandma discovered she possessed magical powers, using them to protect her family from a fearsome dragon. Again, I feigned reluctance, already lifting her onto my lap. "Yes, and don't forget the part where the good judge helps her." As I recounted the tale for what felt like the 100th time, I pondered the unpredictable nature of fate. I had to lose everything to discover what I truly possessed. I had to reach my lowest point to uncover my true strength. "And happily ever after?" Imani inquired when I finished. "Happily ever after," I concluded. "The brave grandma found her happy ending." "You found your happy ending, Grandma," Imani affirmed. I looked around. Aaliyah was setting the dinner table. The garden bloomed luxuriantly. My precious granddaughter was nestled in my arms. And the foundation's letter promised to extend help to even more women. "Yes, my love," I replied. I did. That night, after tucking Imani into bed, I settled into my favorite armchair with a cup of tea and the weekly letters from the women we had aided. A 75-year-old woman expressed gratitude for the courage I'd given her to confront her abusive son. A 60-year-old woman shared her success in reclaiming her home from her swindling grandchildren. Each letter served as confirmation that my suffering had served a higher purpose, transcending my personal pain. Aaliyah joined me, her own cup of tea in hand. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" "About your father," I admitted. "How proud he would be of what we've built." "I'm sure he's watching us," Aaliyah whispered. "And about you," I continued. "How proud I am of the woman you've become." "I learned from the best," she replied, taking my hand. We sat in comfortable silence, savoring the night's tranquility. The faint sounds of the city drifted in the distance, but here in our garden peace reigned supreme. "I love you, Mom," Aaliyah whispered. "And I love you, honey," I replied. "I've always loved you, even in the darkest moments." It was true. A mother's love surpasses hurts, disappointments, and betrayals. It's stronger than pride, more enduring than resentment, and more powerful than any material wealth. That night, I slept soundly, free from nightmares and anxieties. I had discovered something more valuable than all the money in the world. The peace of mind that comes from knowing I had used my second chance wisely. In the end, it wasn't about the extent of my wealth or power. It was about transforming pain into purpose, humiliation into strength, and experience into wisdom for others. I had learned the most profound lesson of all.